The Galactic Council celebrated under a sky that glittered like broken glass, their voices rising through the crystal chambers as if the galaxy itself had finally exhaled. For the first time in centuries, they believed they were safe. They believed humanity was gone, erased, forgotten, nothing but dust drifting in cold space. But peace built on false certainty always shakes before it breaks, and tonight the cracks began to show. A distant hum trembled through the void, faint at first, soft enough for most species to ignore, yet heavy enough to unsettle the oldest minds in the room. It was the kind of sound that lived under the skin, the kind that whispered of storms long before the clouds appeared. On the outer worlds, astronomers lifted their heads as their instruments flickered, their screens showing stars that pulsed like dying embers. They leaned closer, eyes narrowing, breath tightening, unsure if their machines were failing or if the universe itself was shifting. Then the flickers grew stronger, more deliberate, like a heartbeat echoing through endless space. And when the first star vanished, swallowed whole by an impossible darkness, a single shiver ran through every species watching. No natural force behaved like this. No cosmic phenomenon ate light so cleanly, so silently, so completely. Something was moving out there, and it was moving with purpose. Back on the Council's capital, alarms began to chirp beneath the floor, subtle at first, almost polite, until the reading spiked and the warning lights drowned the chamber in red. Delegates froze mid-speech, their triumph turning to dread as the holomaps flickered with collapsing constellations. Sector after sector faded into black, not like explosions, not like failures, but like a curtain dropping over the stars. A counselor stepped forward, voice shaking as he whispered the words no one wanted to hear. "It's coordinated. Someone is doing this." And in the darkest corner of the hall, an elder being closed his eyes, remembering a line from old human archives, a line that had survived even after Earth was declared dead. "When the stars go dark, humanity walks again." He opened his eyes with a quiet tremble as a final constellation vanished from the map, leaving the chamber wrapped in cold shadows. The silence was crushing, heavy, alive. Something ancient was returning, something the Council had sworn could never rise again. And in that suffocating darkness, a single signal pulsed through the void, a human code. A promise. A warning. The human signal echoed through the void like a ghost returning home, a low, steady pulse that slipped past every firewall and every security layer the Council trusted. It traveled through the chamber speakers with a cold softness, a rhythm that carried memory, anger, and something far heavier, purpose. Every delegate stood frozen, their faces washed in red light, their hearts beating in uneven fear as the sound filled the air. It felt like a voice calling from the edge of a nightmare, quiet but impossible to ignore. The elders who remembered humanity's last stand felt their lungs tighten, as if the past had stepped out of the shadows to reclaim them. Across the capital, the night sky dimmed, not with clouds, but with a slow, creeping darkness that seemed to breathe. Citizens stopped in the streets, staring upward with wide eyes as familiar constellations faded like dying candles. A hush swept over the world, a hush filled with questions no one dared ask out loud. Some reached for their children. Some reached for old weapons. Some simply stood still, unable to move, listening as the human signal continued its slow, steady pulse. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't violent. It was something far more unsettling, controlled. Deep in the Council's command center, analysts struggled to decode the signal, their fingers trembling over glowing panels. The data moved like a heartbeat, repeating patterns that seemed almost alive, shifting with every attempt to break it open. Then one technician gasped, leaning closer as her screen resolved a set of coordinates hidden behind the pulse. Her voice cracked when she spoke, the words barely holding together. "It's pointing at us." The room went silent, heavy enough to press against the walls. The coordinates weren't random. They weren't warnings from afar. They were a direct lock on the Council capital itself, broadcast with a confidence no other species dared to show. A veteran strategist stepped forward, his scales trembling under the cold blue lights as he whispered, "Humans never broadcast without reason. If they are sending this, they're already closer than we think." And as the room held its breath, the lights flickered once, dimming just enough for every soul to feel the weight of something enormous passing through space. Then the pulse stopped. The silence that followed felt louder than any alarm. And in that silence, something new began to rise. The silence after the human signal died felt wrong, too heavy, too full, like the universe was holding its breath and waiting for the first scream. Every sensor in the council chamber flickered with static, soft at first, like distant rain, then growing sharper until the screens flashed with distorted shadows. Delegates leaned closer, their eyes reflecting the trembling light, unsure if they were witnessing a glitch or something trying to break through. The room felt colder, the air thinning, as if space itself had pressed its face against their windows, watching them with the patience of an old ghost. And when the static finally cleared, a single image remained on every display, a human silhouette standing against a field of collapsing stars. It wasn't clear, not fully, just the outline of a figure upright and unmoving, bathed in darkness that seemed to pulse like a living storm behind it. But even blurred, even distorted, everyone recognized that shape. Oh, still. Human. A presence that felt both familiar and impossibly distant, like someone who should have been dead long ago, yet stood there as if time had bent around them. For a long moment, no one spoke, no one breathed, until an elder counselor whispered with trembling fear, "That's impossible. Humanity had no survivors." Across the capital, citizens felt the same unease as new tremors rippled across the night sky. The darkness was no longer distant. It crawled along the atmosphere like a slow tide, each wave dimming the world a little more. Street lamps flickered as if suffocating. Buildings shook with a low hum, steady and unnatural. Parents pulled their children indoors, commanders barked orders with voices cracking under pressure, and old veterans of the human wars stared into the sky with memories they wished had stayed buried. Something was coming. Something large enough to disturb gravity itself. Back inside the council's war room, a young analyst shouted from the corner, her voice sharp and shaking. "I found something in the image. Look at the background." She enlarged the frame, pushing past layers of distortion until faint shapes emerged behind the human silhouette. Not stars. Not planets. Warships. Hundreds. Silent. Black. Drifting like a fleet made from the night itself. A chill swept the room as another analyst whispered, "Those aren't ships we know. Those are human designs." And just as fear rooted itself in every heart, the silhouette turned its head. Slow, deliberate, aware. Every screen went black. For several heartbeats after the screens went black, the council chamber felt like an empty tomb, filled only with the trembling breath of those who realized history had just shifted beneath their feet. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. It was as if the universe had pressed a cold hand over their mouths, warning them that the next sound they made might be their last moment of peace. When the lights flickered back to life, they came on dim and uncertain, like a candle in a growing storm, and the delegates stared at one another with a fear they had spent generations denying. Humanity was not gone, and whatever they had become, it was nothing the council had prepared for. Across the planet, emergency sirens erupted through the streets, sharp and frantic, pushing crowds into shelters as the sky continued to darken. People looked up with shaking hands and wet eyes, whispering prayers to old gods and old memories, searching for anything familiar in the shadows swallowing the stars. But there was no comfort, only the slow rumble of engines too deep to hear and too massive to ignore. The dark fleet was moving, and its presence felt like a second horizon rising above them. Some believed it was revenge. Others believed it was justice. And some, the oldest among them, felt something worse, recognition. In the council's command center, panic clashed with guilt, old reports flashing across screens as commanders shouted for evacuation protocols. But an elder archivist stepped forward, her voice quiet and steady, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You need to see this," she whispered, placing a small data crystal onto the central table. The crystal glowed with the faint warmth of secrets long buried. With trembling hands, she activated it, revealing an encrypted file stamped with a symbol no one had seen in a century, the seal of Earth's last government. The room fell silent as an old recording flickered into view. A human general stood before them, scarred, calm, eyes filled with a fire that had never dimmed. His voice carried through the chamber with a quiet weight, every word wrapped in certainty. "If the Council attacks Earth, if they erase our people, the Terran Legacy Fleet will activate. We will not chase you. We will not hunt you. But one day, when the stars dim, you will face us." The recording ended, leaving the room frozen, breathless, shaking. The stars outside dimmed again. And this time, they stayed dark. The darkness outside the council capital thickened until it felt like a living thing pressing against the planet, a slow, crushing weight that made every heartbeat echo louder than words. Commanders rushed across the war room, their voices trembling, their urgency breaking through years of arrogance and denial. They ordered shields to full power, but the system groaned like a wounded creature, barely responding, as if the darkness itself was draining the world's strength. The holographic map flickered, revealing the silhouette of the Terran Legacy Fleet moving closer. Massive, silent, shaped like monuments carved from the void. No engines visible. No heat signatures. Nothing familiar. Just black colossi drifting toward the heart of the Council with a calm that felt colder than any weapon. On the surface, families huddled in shelters as the ground vibrated beneath their feet, a deep rumble growing stronger with every second. It felt like the planet was holding back tears it could no longer swallow. Children clung to their parents as lights flickered overhead, casting long, trembling shadows that danced across metal walls. Every person felt the same fear, a fear born not from hatred, but from the crushing truth that they might be witnessing the return of a civilization wronged beyond forgiveness. In the council chamber, the elders stared at the old Terran recording still glowing on the table, their minds replaying the general's warning with haunting clarity. One elder covered his face with trembling hands, whispering, "We thought we destroyed them. We thought we could bury our mistake." Another stepped forward, voice breaking, "We didn't end humanity. We created something else. Something colder. Something patient." His words hung in the air like a final confession. Then the planet shook. Not from impact. Not from weapons. But from a signal so powerful it rippled through the crust like thunder. Every screen lit up at once, blinding white, before resolving into an image of the same human silhouette. Now clearer, closer, standing as if it were watching them from across infinity. This time, the figure raised a hand. And for the first time it spoke. A voice deep and steady filled the chamber, filled the world, filled the system. "Council of Worlds, your reckoning has arrived." The darkness outside split open as hundreds of Terran warships ignited with silent blue fire, revealing their full size at last. The first ship descended, and every alarm in the galaxy began to scream. The first Terran warship descended like a falling midnight star, its hull swallowing light, its presence shaking the very air of the Council capital. Yet it released no weapon, fired no beam, offered no destruction. It simply hovered above the city, silent and immovable, as if waiting, as if watching. The world below trembled beneath the weight of its shadow, the people caught between terror and awe, their hearts pounding not because death was coming, but because something far more complicated was unfolding. In the council chamber, the silhouette of the human figure remained on every screen, its outline steady, its gaze unblinking, its presence commanding the room like a memory carved into stone. The voice returned, softer this time, yet deeper, carrying the gravity of a species that refused to vanish. "You tried to erase us," it said, the words flowing like distant thunder. "But humanity does not disappear. Humanity endures." The delegates felt the truth cut through them, sharper than any blade, because behind the voice they heard something unexpected. Pain. Not rage, not vengeance, but the grief of a people who had watched their home burn and chose not to become monsters in their return. Across the planet, the warships shifted formation, creating a ring of blue fire around the capital, not as a cage but as a show of power held back, strength under control. The engines hummed with ancient discipline, ships standing perfectly still as if reminding the galaxy that true force does not need to scream to be felt. The elders bowed their heads, some in guilt, some in relief, as the human figure leaned closer on the screen, its edges sharpening until the outline became clear. Not a weapon, not a soldier, but a guardian wearing the symbols of Earth's last stand. "We rise from darkness," the figure said, voice carrying across the world. "Not to destroy you, but to make sure no world suffers what we suffered." Murmurs rippled across the chamber, the weight of war collapsing under the possibility of something new. Hope, fragile but real, flickered like a small flame in a storm. The Terran Legacy Fleet slowly lifted, engines glowing brighter, as if offering the Council one silent chance to rebuild the future. And as the shadows drifted away from the stars, the human voice whispered a final vow carried through every corner of the galaxy. "Remember us, not for our fall, but for how we rose." And in the returning light, the universe felt forever changed. Even after the Terran Legacy Fleet lifted back into the stars, the planet below did not breathe normally. The air felt changed, charged, as if the very atmosphere remembered the presence of something ancient and powerful that had hovered above it only moments before. Citizens stepped out of their shelters in slow silence, their eyes fixed on the fading blue trails left by the human warships. They expected ruin, yet found only sky. They expected vengeance, yet found restraint. And that contradiction shook them far more than any weapon ever could. Inside the council chamber, the delegates stood around the dimmer screens, staring at the frozen image of the human guardian whose voice had echoed across every world. The figure had vanished from the displays, but its words lingered like a heartbeat still beating inside the walls. Remember us, not for our fall, but for how we rose. Some leaders whispered about apology. Others whispered about alliance. But the eldest among them whispered something the room wasn't ready to hear. This was not a warning. This was a message within a message. The archivist who had uncovered the old Terran file stepped forward again, her hands trembling as she slid the crystal back into the console. "There is more," she said softly. "Something locked behind deeper encryption." When she activated it, the crystal responded with a warmth that spread through the room like the glow of a candle fighting the dark. Layers of code unfolded across the screen, symbols moving like living threads, weaving themselves into shapes that shifted faster than any alien system could track. The lights flickered. The air tightened. The encryption wasn't resisting them. It was watching them. Then the room went cold. The screen cleared, revealing not another recording, not another warning, but a map of the galaxy. Points of light burned across the display, hundreds of them, arranged in patterns no council scientist recognized. Slowly, painfully, the meaning settled in as the map rotated and zoomed out, revealing the full scope. These weren't star systems. These weren't fleets. They were Terran colonies. Hidden. Silent. Spread across the galaxy like seeds planted in shadow. Some were near. Some were far. And some were inside council space. A young commander collapsed into his seat, eyes wide, voice trembling as he whispered the truth out loud. Humanity didn't survive in the dark. They built an entire civilization there. And before anyone could speak, the map pulsed. Once, bright and deliberate, as if the humans were acknowledging they'd been found. The glowing map of Terran colonies hung in the air like a second sky, each point of light pulsing with silent meaning. The council chamber felt smaller now, the walls tighter, the air heavier, as if the galaxy itself had taken one long step closer to them. Delegates stared at the map with wide, frightened eyes, realizing their oldest belief, that humanity had vanished, had not only been wrong, but dangerously blind. These were not scattered survivors. These were thriving worlds. Organized. Hidden. Growing in the dark while the council celebrated their memory as dust. Whispers filled the room, brittle and trembling. Some asked how the humans had hidden so much for so long. Others asked why they had chosen to remain silent. But one question cut through all the rest, spoken by a young diplomat who looked barely old enough to stand in this hall. "Why reveal this now?" she whispered, voice cracking under the weight of the truth. "Why show us who they have become?" Silence followed, long and chilling, until the archivist stepped toward the hologram with slow, steady steps. She reached out, her fingers trembling, letting the map's glow brush her skin like a warm breath from a distant star. "Because the Terran Legacy Fleet was never meant to destroy us," she said softly. "It was meant to warn us that something else is coming." The room froze. Those words hung in the air like a falling blade, sharp and heavy, as every delegate stared at her in disbelief. But deep inside, some part of them already knew. The Terran ships had shown strength, yes. Control, yes. But not domination. Not conquest. Their silence, their restraint. It all pointed to a deeper reason for their return. Outside, the sky remained unnaturally dim, the stars only half visible through a haze that moved like a slow ocean of shadow. People gathered in the streets, watching the heavens in quiet fear, sensing that the darkness wasn't receding, it was shifting. Preparing. A low hum drifted across the air, so faint it felt like the world was exhaling through clenched teeth. Yet underneath that hum was something else. A vibration that made every instinct tighten. Back in the war room, the holographic map pulsed again. But this time, the Terran colonies flickered in unison, like lights answering a distant call. A call from something vast. Something approaching. And the glow dimmed, leaving the council staring into the first breath of the coming storm. The storm arrived without warning. One moment the sky above the council capital was dim, trembling under the weight of distant shadows. And the next, it split open like a wound. Light poured through the tier, not warm, not gentle, but harsh and violent, streaking across the atmosphere like blazing scars. Buildings shook. Ground trembled. People staggered as the air vibrated deep inside their bones. And from that tear in the sky came a sound that felt older than the galaxy itself, a deep roar that swallowed every other noise. This was no Terran fleet. This was something far worse, something humanity had been hiding from in the dark. The council chamber erupted into chaos as the holographic map shattered into static. Delegates shouted for evacuation routes, for defense codes, for anything that could make sense of the blinding light above them. But no command reached the systems. No signal escaped the storm. Every screen flickered as if begging for breath, then died in silence. The archivist clutched the table, fear flooding her voice as she whispered, "It's not humanity we should fear. It's whatever they were preparing us for." Outside, the tear widened, unraveling like a burning curtain. And from within its blinding heart emerged colossal shapes, silhouettes of creatures or machines or something in between, jagged forms that pulsed with violent red heat. Their edges cracked with lightning. Their presence bent the air, crushed metal, warped gravity. Citizens screamed as shockwaves rippled across the city, tearing through towers, hurling debris into the sky, flipping entire transports like weightless toys. Then, in the middle of that chaos, a shadow fell across the storm. A Terran warship, larger than any before, dropped between the city and the creatures, its hull absorbing the impact of the next blast like a shield made of living steel. Blue fire ignited across its surface, forming a barrier that wrapped the capital in shimmering protection. More Terran ships followed, diving through the blinding tear with a precision that seemed impossible under such violence. They moved not like conquerors, but like guardians rushing to defend a world on the edge of extinction. The council stared upward, breathless, as the human voice returned, no longer quiet, no longer restrained, but filled with a fury forged from centuries of loss. "Stand down and take shelter. The enemy is not you." Another creature broke from the storm, claws like molten rivers. The lead Terran ship charged. The sky erupted in white fire, and everything went silent. The silence after the white fire felt unreal, a heavy stillness that settled over the world like the last breath before dawn. Dust drifted through the air in soft, trembling spirals, settling across broken streets and shattered stone. Survivors emerged slowly from shelters, their eyes wide, their hearts shaking, unsure if the sky above was safe to look at. And when they finally lifted their gaze, they saw it. The storm was gone. The tear in the heavens had closed into a thin silver seam, fading like a scar healing after a brutal wound. The monstrous shapes had vanished into the void. All that remained were the Terran ships, hovering like silent sentinels, engines glowing with calm blue light. In the council chamber, the delegates stood among fallen debris, their voices quiet, their pride stripped away, replaced by something deeper, gratitude. A communicator sparked to life on the table, humming softly, and the familiar human voice filled the room once more, softer now, gentler, as if speaking to wounded friends instead of enemies. "The breach is sealed," the voice said, carrying warmth beneath its strength. "You survived because you stood long enough for us to reach you." Several counselors bowed their heads, emotion tightening their throats, the weight of their old mistakes finally settling on their shoulders. Outside, as the sky cleared, the largest Terran warship descended lower, its vast shadow sweeping across the capital with the calm reassurance of a protective hand. Its hull opened in a slow, graceful motion, revealing not soldiers, but medics, engineers, and humanitarian drones fanning out across the devastated city. They moved among the people with quiet purpose, lifting debris, stabilizing buildings, carrying the wounded to safety. For the first time in living memory, the crowd looked at humans, or what humanity had become, not with fear, but with wonder. The archivist stepped into the open air, tears rolling down her cheeks as she whispered, "They didn't rise from darkness to conquer us, they rose to save us." Around her, the survivors listened to the soft hum of Terran engines healing the world piece by piece. And for the first time, the entire planet understood the truth hidden beneath humanity's long silence. Strength is never measured by the power to erase, but by the courage to protect. The human voice spoke one last time, echoing across every heart below. "In the darkest night, we learned who we are. And today, you learned it too." And as the Terran ships lifted into the returning light, the galaxy felt its first true hope in 1,000 years.